Ekkin. Had the gods graced him with another dream, the son of Heva might have lived a life like many others. Instead, by their design, Melanthios awoke with a vision, even if he only sought out its meaning at the behest of Yulia, his adoptive sister and future consort. That vision led him deep under the earth, where Melanthios found his epiphany, and the sword's judgment and soundless song through which he would make it manifest. From Gaius Aeschines, Norian History, Book 1, Chapter 16, Sections 3-4. The hall was a maze for which Ekkin had no thread. Twice now he had lost himself in its windings of brick and stone. He was determined not to make this the third. There was somewhere he needed to be, for he had been summoned. The Empress. Procne Adon was not to be kept waiting, much less for this, the first ever of their unions. The news would have once elated him alongside his lord father, a chance for their clan's restoration. Now he heard only laughter, 1,000 whispers dogging his every step. "Why do you even bother?" they sneered. "She asked for the Hellstred's heir, but instead you're sending a scared little boy who can't even find his way." Why had she bothered? Ekkin wondered. The news had come over breakfast, as he had dined with Valerius, Bruno, and another. But now their presence was custom, as it had been in the 24 days since their depart from the walls of Green Navria. His lieutenants had asked few questions, each for their own reason. His men had asked none. It was clear enough to them, even if they thought wrongly. And so the Kertari had crossed the gates of Red Navria and later New Elon at his side and had been granted a room close to his in its labyrinthine palace. Ekkin gritted his teeth. If only. But that frustration had to wait. Before him was the maze of New Elon's palace, built in and around the city's spire, jutting from a bluff forming the city's southern district. And how he hated it. Both it and Mount Viridian had been carved into the side of a cliff. But whereas his home balanced sky and stone, New Elon's palace was an anthill built to human size. He scarcely dared leave his quarters for the first few days, and even after rarely journeyed far. And so he had failed himself, now caught in a place he did not know and could not escape. How much? A voice behind a nearby door tore Ekkin from his thoughts. Or can it be credit? Credit? Another voice chuckled. Cannot your master afford such a trifle, or has he set aside all his gold for that piece of his? She's nothing of the sort. Ekkin froze, then scowled. It was Valerius. Then what is she? A friend. Valerius paused. Regardless, I cannot go to him about the money. I simply cannot. Ekkin went for the door's handle, then paused. Quietly, he crouched down and pressed his eye to the keyhole. Within sat Valerius and another, that one's tunic almost gold in the light well's piercing glow. If a suit is your object, the man in yellow replied coolly, why not borrow one yourself? Would that not be easier? If you intend to compete on the morrow. A knot formed in Ekkin's stomach. 3 nights ago was the White's new moon, and so in the morning would begin the games celebrating the Empire's victory over Green Navria. Such that it was. It had been the talk of the men since their depart. Melee, mounted duels, javelin throw, archery, the wheel, the dreaded all-form. Each eyed the preferred event, and the prize that came with it, until those hopes had been dashed by the sudden announcement of Uther Otho's passing. The martial games instead would be small, even if the prizes remained momentous. Gold, a knighthood, granted by Tychon Otho himself, a lordship, complete with its own lands and incomes, a wish, true and constant. But why the mounted duels? Ekkin wondered. Wouldn't Valerius have told me? And besides, isn't he already heir to his father's castle? I'm not here to rent, Valerius spat. Yes, it's needed for the games, but also after, if we win. And the proper type. Few enough sell such things. hence why I've come to you. It is true, the man in yellow frowned, that, being a rich man, my master is a purveyor of finds many and wondrous. As he spoke, Ekkin made out the fibula on the man's shoulder, bronze and wrought in the shape of bundled wheat. One of Siveth's men. Behind him was the object of their debate, a suit of armor, its steel frost-like from countless scratches. Though ancient, it was nevertheless beautiful, with skeletal ribbing and a beaked helmet resembling a raptor's skull. That being said, the man in yellow went on, coin is cheap to Lord Siveth, so, tell to me, what else are you willing to offer? Although Ekkin wished to listen on, the cackle of footsteps drove him from the lock and further down the hall. He was expected, he reminded himself, and he could not afford to be late. And yet, he wondered. Eventually, however, he found it. Up one corridor and down another, a hall bare save for a single door, checkered black and white, and flanked by two priestly lectorials standing still as pillars. Sir Ekkin Helster. Their eyes judged him as he approached. We've been expecting you. Amid whatever time of day it is to you two, Ekkin gritted his teeth. I'm here to see the Empress. When he tried to pass, however, their orichalcum-tipped sword staves crossed over the door. Your blade, if it please you. On the guard's lips it was almost a slur. Sighing, Ekkin unbuckled Fortune and thrust it into the guard's waiting palms. If I have to endure this again, Ekkin scowled as they searched his body for blades that were not there. I will make a pyre of your family's home. When they were satisfied, the two finally let Ekkin pass into the Empress's chambers. The first thing Ekkin noticed was the smell. Cloves, lemon, brick, leather, sunlight. It was a solar, and he its only guest. One of its walls was a baldachin-draped archway to a courtyard beyond. The opposite wall held a door. Incense wafted from silver braziers set about the room. Cardamom, sandalwood, things Ekkin couldn't even recognize. It was as if he had entered upon the chambers of a god, though which he could not say. Devitia of the bountiful harvests? Her sister Adone of the warm embers and warmer kisses? Or was it chill Hiemet, or one of the Moonen, ever generous Myri? Vitria the Tallier? Or was this not the garden of earthly delights, where labyrinth weaver Phaestira lured the unawares only to trap them in her web? Indeed, it was Phaestira's garden, Ekkin thought as he wandered the room, for littering its shelves were curiosities from the deep places of the world. A pair of dragon eggs, their surfaces seeming one moment metal and the next ceramic. A tragedy mask, stained with dried blood. Glazed pots detailing the lives and deeds of Navrian heroes. Ancient scrolls and manuscripts. A carved idol that Ekkin expected to find warm to the touch, if he had touched it. A dagger, dark as night and sharp as sin. A chain of golden thorns, glinting even in shadow. An iron diadem, its fang-like barb seemingly meant to pierce the skull of its wearer. And then Ekkin came face to face with himself. It was a mirror, the largest he had ever seen, yet, where all others, whether bronze or silver, bore a warped or discolored image, this one was perfect, impossibly so, and through such perfection its subject's lack was all too clear. Balding scalp, buck teeth, coarse skin, eyes that were both too wide and too small. Before him was an ugly man made only uglier by the finery fitted to his frame. Instinctively, Ekkin ran a hand through what remained of his hair. He paused, then slowly began reaching towards the impossibly smooth surface. Closer, closer. Curious, is it not? Ekkin spun around. Behind him was the Empress. Like a vengeful spirit, standing at her shoulder was a knight. Durakos the Grey. On his back was Sapience, the storied sword which had slain the god-king of Garax. Closing in on 70, Sir Durakos was nevertheless stalwart, his scowl barely concealed beneath a flowing white beard. While the Emperor's royal guards were permitted retirement after 20 years' service, for 300, Each had only relinquished their holy blade at the behest of gem-cheeked Sortira. Your Majesty! Ekkin's cheeks burned. I did not... The Empress chuckled. At ease, my Knight of Helster, at ease. Ekkin nodded mechanically. The Empress over the Norians wore a dress and shawl so blue they shamed the sky. Her hair was a beehive of curls, perhaps a bed of writhing snakes. 2, in fact, were at her hips, winding goldenly only to kiss at her abdomen. 2 more coiled around each of her wrists. Ekkin gulped. Oh look, Procne Adon mused. He seems to have frozen in fear. Sir Duracos, bring us some refreshment, would you? Your Grace. Sir Duracos bowed, steel boots clinking as he left through the other door. Come here. Ekkin's eyes bulged as the Empress wrapped her arms around him and pressed her body to his. Suddenly, he was all too aware of the sword not at his side. Don't worry, she whispered in his ear. I know you mean no harm. What is over there? Ekkin finally managed to ask once she stepped away. There? Procne Adon motioned to the doorway. My apartments. What else? Your apartments? Ekkin made a face. My husband is beside himself with grief. His eldest son, taken so suddenly and half a world away at that. But come. Procne Adon turned him to the mirror. What do you think of this menagerie? Or just this thing, if it please you? The man in the mirror gulped. How can such a thing even exist? Who knows? The Empress shrugged. And yet it does. I was told they found it in the earth. As for those scrolls, she pointed to them. I haven't a clue. I might try some, but Magister Volp jokingly said I should wait until I'm past 50 and not a woman. He said that? Ekkin echoed, only to wince. Of course Magister Volp would say something like that. I mean, what is in them? Drivel. The Empress frowned. All so-and-so sold me this, or we agreed to that. Nothing truly momentous, unless one can discover a crime from ledgers and contracts. But not that one can't. But from these? I think not. With a nod, Ekkin began reaching for one of the scrolls. I wouldn't. Procne Adon scolded. Ekkin pulled his hand back. Why not? Our refreshments are here. Behind them, Sir Duracos had returned, flanked by 2 serving women carrying bronze platters. The Queen of Green Navria was more than generous with her gifts, Procne Adon said as the women placed their charges onto the table. Come, try this. It was a clay cup, warm to the touch. Inside steamed a dark, viscous fluid. I'm all right. Thank you. Ekkin tried to smile. Oh no, I insist. Procne picked up her own cup. They said it's made from some sort of bean. It's quite good. In his grip, the top of the drink shimmered unnaturally. Go on. Ekkin raised the cup to his lips. It was hot and bitter, with dregs like burnt soil. Ekkin finished one sip, then another. And they say my son died of poison. Ekkin nearly spat his drink out, while many whispered it was murder, not sickness, which had felled the crown prince. The latter was still the official tale. For now. Too bitter? Procne Adon frowned. Ekkin wiped the side of his mouth as his cheeks burned. Maybe. Can it be had with honey? Milk? How degenerate! The Empress burst out laughing. Though perhaps this luxury is decadence enough, while the rabble eats oats with the rest of the animals. She offered him a plate of olives, cheese, and honeycomb, each glistening in the afternoon sun. How about it, then? She smirked. You wouldn't say no to a bit of degeneracy. Ekkin's breath drew short. Staring into her flint-grey eyes, he reached for a cut of honeycomb. It was warm and sticky against his fingers, and some lingered there as he put the thing in his mouth and began to chew. Enjoying yourself? Procne chuckled as he tasted its sweetness. Ekkin swallowed, trying to forget his throbbing heart. Greatly, Your Highness. Oh, please, call me Procne. It was such a small thing, but her sneer sank Ekkin's heart all the same, and in its wake returned visions of yesterday. The marches, the prisoners and the pit, the jars of smashed olives and dreams as the city burned. Didn't happen like that, though, Ekkin tried to tell himself. It was a small sack. and they could have prevented it had they just opened the gates. People like that, they probably deserved it. And yet he wasn't sure. Will you compete on the morrows? She was staring into the courtyard now, songbird-like. No, Ekkin corrected himself. She's a siren. I chose not to. Ekkin tried to sound tactful. I just like tournaments. Besides, competing for gold and titles does not behoove one of my station. That hasn't stopped Lord Knox. Procne Adon frowned. He has no need for an extra lordship, but has joined the lists for the mounted duels all the same. And I am not Lord Knox, Ekkin replied. My reputation would only flounder had I so invested myself. That was the truth of it. Whether in the duels, melee, all form, or even javelin throw, Ekkin would have struggled even for recognition, let alone a crown. You don't know that. She leaned against a column, half vanishing behind one of the drapes. The gods already favor you, Ekkin, and where gods neglect, we act. Adding your name would be no compulsion, or have you too place silver on Nox's victory. Ekkin froze. It was true, as had anyone with half a brain, everyone except Bruno, who never put coin on the Magister of War. Or Valerius, Ekkin realized. If we win. What we? Who is he sponsoring? I would lose, he said bluntly. Yet there are ways to improve a man's abilities. She strode towards him, advantages many would take, given your position. Or have I found someone unambitious? Why have you brought me here, woman? At the word, Ekkin's eyes went wide. Oh, a nerve. Procne curled her lips. Well, lordling, I hope to find a man of counsel, but all I see is a little boy with a weak tongue. Forgive me, I beg you, Ekkin smarted. One small error, to show all the more truthfully I can speak. Then answer me this. The Empress was ice. The Kertari in your company, Erga, I hear she's called. Who is she to you? Ekkin stiffened. The answer was obvious, even without knowing the things whispered to himself, what he wanted, and yet he had to answer. For his father. For his promise. I rescued her from death. His words are clumsy. She's a friend, even if a wind worshipper. I haven't the heart to rid myself of her. Yet. And so, in your narrow-mindedness, you mistake ducks and geese. Procne smirked. The Kertari are a powerful people, resourceful and strong. Proven mercenaries. Why else do you think we renamed their lands, burned their texts and relics, and scattered their children to the winds? We suppressed them as to not invite a challenge to our rule. That's why I admire her, Ekkin professed. She has spirit. A shame she devotes it to war. War, horrid war. Procne rolled her eyes. She may yet be turned to another cause, Ekkin insisted. Maybe even from that mumbling they call a religion. Ah, yes, Procne Adon nodded. Their faith is little more than superstitious nonsense. Ours is based in fact and the red blood of sacrifice. What? Ekkin, the Empress sighed. You really think the gods, even if they exist, care about us? The temple's power comes from our belief in it. As for the miracles, I know better than to ask. The same is true for the Inquisition. Their strength comes not from their mission, but because they reinforce the temple, and through it, us. Her blatantness made Ekkin's head spin. Sure, what she said seemed true, for the most part, but to say it out loud, and the Empress at that. Why are you telling me this? A matter of perspective. Procne's gaze met his. I need someone who can see things as they are, and tell me true. You have failed one test. Let us see if you can pass another. A few minutes later, it was before them. Strategos, it was called. Ekkin knew it well, for no lord of merit was ignorant to its designs. The game of kings, it was oft called, or sometimes that of gods. Its essence was war, only waged on a tiled. The one before Ekkin was marble, black as the sea and threaded with gold lattice in the shape of the known world. At its sight he grew cold, realizing what he had agreed to. They say it took 1,000 nights to master the game, and at her age, Procne Adon undoubtedly had thousands. How many points? The Empress asked as a servant laid out the silver miniatures. Dozens of them, soldier and commander, scout and knight, archer and catapult, magistrate and castle and king. 100, as is custom. He tried to sound confident. Unless one of us wants to try with 80. No, that's quite all right. Procne Adon took another sip of her black liquor. We both know I'd still win, said her smile. Ekkin clenched his jaw, then released it. What's that one? He pointed to a set of pieces he didn't recognize, hooded and carrying a staff. A local variety. Procne offered one to him. Some call it the spy, others mage. What does it do? The silver weighed in Ekkin's hand. As I hear it, it has the same movement and point cost as a commander, only its ability is quite unique. She leaned back. In exchange for its life, the spy can kill at a distance, or bring back one of your own pieces from the dead. Horribly imbalanced, I know. As is war. Ekkin gave the piece back. My dear commander! Procne laughed. Ekkin felt his cheeks redden once more. It's also horribly unrealistic. Never have forces so equal met, nor on a field so plain. That we even choose our armies is yet another fiction. Then choose as thou wilt. Procne took another sip. O god of... Behind the curtain, Ekkin began choosing his pieces wisely. That was the trick of it. Field an army tailored to counter your opponents, while still strong enough to capture the king on its own. His was a tall piece, set with rubies. To it he joined a set of castles, catapults, 2 magistrates, and what about her? Ekkin gritted his teeth, moved the pieces aside, and began again, this time with something actually decent. Then again, and again, and again. A swarm of soldiers, near bereft of leaders. The siege sally, archers and catapults hidden behind castles. A crash of cavalry, led by the king and his loyal magistrates. Castles, knights, and 4 spies. Nothing was right. Ekkin reached for his sword and froze when he gripped only air. All done? Procne asked from the other side of the curtain bisecting the field. A moment. Sweat pooling on his brow, Ekkin hastily began assembling pieces adding up to 100 points. In the end, it was mostly infantry, a few special units, and a swath of heavy cavalry. Hammer and anvil. Simple, yet effective. No castles, though. I hope this works. When he saw his opponent, though, Ekkin's heart sank. Procne's force was smaller, yet brimming with archers and catapults. Although plotting, it too was fully mobile, and clearly designed to do one thing. Crush. Procne went first, slowly advancing with soldier and commander alike. Some of Ekkin's cavalry rode out to meet them, while remaining outside the range of her siege engines and archers. When she retreated, Ekkin pursued. For his impetuousness, he lost a commander to a stray catapult. Do recall, Procne smiled as she handed Ekkin his fallen commander. Catapults fire longer in straight lines. Ekkin tried to hide his scowl. While he had lost only a minor piece, the Empress was practically unscathed. The next skirmishes went better, but as the game progressed, Ekkin found himself increasingly fearing the Empress's siege and their slow advance across the field. Your tactics are sound, she admitted while lazily removing another soldier from the board, but you play only in the moment. Ekkin paused, hand on one of his knights. What do you mean? Novices win by annihilation, Procne confessed. Experts let the court survive and trap the king within so they may inherit. I'm familiar, Ekkin gritted his teeth. As for the need to plan 2 moves ahead. Only 2? Procne chuckled as she again moved forward her siege. How then will you see the future? The future? A cataract, each drop a possibility, and like how the river paddler carefully chooses the path that sees them through, I see my desired end and move towards it. 1,000 other Procnes guide my hands, so I may escape those doomed worlds where they languish full of longing. A chill came over Ekkin despite the afternoon rays. Your Not talking about strategos, are you? Am I? Procne smiled. Your moves. If. Ekkin slowly moved a few soldiers forward. Your concern is only arriving at the best future. Where does that leave the rest of us? Then we be little more than animals? Prisoners. Ekkin grew sour as he finished. To me, my life is my own. I see and act as I will. But you'd see me caged, calling images what you would shadows, little more than an animal indeed, without a will of my own, merely responding to light and heat and food, like an animal. Oh, don't be so bitter. Procne laughed as she advanced her line to meet his. It is true. While I live and think, I cannot say the same for you, or you me for that matter. But yes, that metaphor is quite apt, isn't it? Going through life caring only about the next meal, unawares that your shepherd also has a knife. Yet, in such a state, one seems truly innocent. Innocent? Innocent, Procne repeated, for how can one not be innocent if they only move on another's command? One could slay 100 prisoners for 100 days and still be innocent, if they were only the agent of another, whether it be man, the world's logic, or the gods themselves. Pieces on the board, if you would. And how could they ever be anything but innocent? Do you really see the world like that? Procne laughed. If I did, why would I tell you? Two-tongued cat, Ekkin scowled. I don't think it's that simple. He picked up his cavalry. If the soldiers led by his captain, them their general, them their king and emperor and the gods, then the gods alone bear fault. But the soldier chose to obey his orders. How can they be innocent if they themselves chose, even when pushed by a divine hand? Well, then one must account for dice, Procne exclaimed, especially for those most devious ones dwelling in the heart. After all, any who assigns cause from logic alone exists in a state of sin. Without such dice, the soldier does as he is told. With them, he may still act as he should, but the shadow of his agency is preserved. Were those dice rare, for we would command others as perfectly as these pieces, as we truly know what's best for them, and us. She captured another soldier, then a spy, and handed them to Ekkin. But if soldiers are mere pieces, Ekkin wheeled some of his cavalry around. What stopped us from hiring each of the Kirtari companies after we'd bested them? Your moves. I would've. Procne looked down at the forming encirclement. But other pieces are in my way. My dear husband, for instance. Tychon Otho. Ekkin grew uneasy. The same, Procne admitted. In his goat-headedness, he has decided to rush home against mine and his counselors' better judgments, especially when there is so much to be done. You seemed satisfied enough with the negotiations, Ekkin countered. I was. Procne repositioned a few of her soldiers. But a miracle happened. The city's capture, combined with the Veer's troubles at home, has prevented a war which we would not have easily won. Tenuous peace, but peace nonetheless. And so, my dear Ekkin, your bravery has shaped history and set it upon the correct path. Ekkin scowled. She was right. His sister was right. He had captured the city. He had saved the Empire from war. And yet, it still felt hollow, for he hadn't done it alone. On the board, Ekkin saw only a dimly lit cell and the thing he had reawakened and loosed upon the world. Do you think he was lying? Ekkin asked. Isolon. Our man of mystery, Procne chuckled. What a strange question. It's incredible to believe, but I don't see why not. We need see him again, though, and the chances of that... Low? Procne leaned in. Your moves. Ekkin clenched his teeth and continued his encirclement, hoping he still had enough to win despite his lowered numbers and Procne's catapults. To answer, though, she continued, I do care about my son. Son? Ekkin finished his movements. I thought you had two. Forgive me. I grieve your loss. It's all right. Procne looked over the board. 4 I've had, and 1 girl. Now 2 of them have died, one at Fair Calais and one at Tegia's Hill, while I got to bury neither. The others, though, are more Tychon Othos than my own. Only Edmund remains. He is precious to me in the way only another mother could understand. Ekkin was silent, thinking of an ancient chair, empty save for a single silken glove, black as regret. Aha! Procne grinned. Death in 5. What? Ekkin looked it over himself. How? I nearly have you encircled. My cavalry is at your rear. Oh, don't be so crude. You coward. The Empress's face was a mask. Look closely. Your king has exposed himself to my siege. Correcting that is quite the cost, I fear. For next turn it'll be the same, and as your king scurries away, I'll wheel around my horse and, just so, the encircler becomes the encircled. But I outnumber you! Ekkin clenched his teeth. He sounded so childish. I stretched your line thin. Only horse for horse. Procne slid some of her soldiers backwards. I need only move these. And now you're stretched thin. But you'll surely lose the front. Ekkin felt the veins in his neck bulge. Oh, I will. Procne tapped her siege. But hesitation is death, and you hesitated. I've made the calculations, every possible move, and only this leads to your end, should you play without fault. Were you to not, your death would still come, only sooner. Ekkin just sat there. He could see it now. He'd retreat his king, only to lose the battle. He'd retreat everything, but lose even faster. And yet, his king still stood there, doomed to die yet not yet dead, unawares to the fate hanging over him. What's the point? Oh, don't give me that, Procne scolded. You look like someone just stole your first kiss. How could I have won? The words were slow, sharp as icicles. From here, Procne reclined in her seat. You can't. The path diverged long ago. You're led by your pieces, they by their own whims. And if I recall correctly, you squandered one early, not realizing the consequence of your decision. Perhaps you've been lost ever since, doomed only to realize your shortcomings when they mattered most. Maybe it came later, when you lost your spy. Maybe the game has been unsound from the start, decided with the very pieces you chose to play. The words were a blow to Ekkin's ribs, reawakening the pain that had only ceased days prior. So, he whispered, was there ever hope for me? Procne shook her head. Not in this doomed world, where those who should have lived died, those who should have died lived, and those who should have stayed left. Those who should have died. The words were the tides of an indomitable sea against Ekkin's mind. When had it happened? When he had slipped into a world without saving? Was it when he had rescued Erga from death, only now to simmer in discontent? Or was it earlier, when he had freed the man who went on to profess his right of empire? Or was it even earlier, when he had been found by a loving father and unloving family? Or was it even before him, when his father's first wife had unrightfully slipped beneath the chain of gem-cheeked Sortira? In either respect, the Empress continued, a sequence was set in motion where all outcomes led here, to your end. But there is yet one way to win. Tell me. The words were hollow, the pant of a dog with all the fight whipped out of him. Do you really want to know? Yes, Ekkin nodded. Please, tell me. Procne removed a piece from the board and handed it to him. It was the spy.